Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Jeremy, and I will be talking about some of the history that I've been able to uncover about early Black Yale students. I'll be sharing a presentation and going through that presentation essentially with you all, just to make sure that you can see. I am excited to again share it and hope that you all appreciate the information. So I'm just trying to make sure I am sharing the right screen. So I'll try this one more time. Okay. So what I will start by doing is sharing why this work is important and how learning history impacts our self-image, as well as the image that we have of society. One of the important things is understanding how frequently Black stories and stories of African Americans are not a part of the larger narrative, and how that can have negative impacts on certain people and their perceptions of both themselves, as well as how they fit into society. And frequently, Yale is no exception. So we'll go through some of the prevailing narratives surrounding Yale, its history, how it recognizes it, and then the perceptions overall of the institution and how potentially Black students fit in. Then we'll look into some of the research that I did in filling in some of those blanks and why some of those stories of those early Black Yale students were important to me and how they can shape the narrative and reshape the narrative of those who come after us. So again, my topic is, of course, uncovering excellence, learning history as resistance. So talking about how whenever we encounter some of those narratives that don't quite fit where they should or do not encompass the whole story, how we're now armored to, correct some of those stories. All right, so moving on. So again, teaching history impacts our social perception. So it impacts how we see ourselves. So if you think about everything that we're taught from, growing up to who we are, how we fit into society, a lot of how we see ourselves in the world around us is dependent upon what we're taught about things like history and race and culture and nationality and gender and sexual identity and income and social status and height, weight, values, peers, community. All these things go into how we are taught, what we are taught, and the ways in which we're taught, and how to digest that information. So I find it highly important to not only share history, but teach it in the right way and make sure it is part of a particular context that accurately reflects everything that is possible about those particular moments and situations and institutions. And in this presentation, of course, Yale is no exception. So here I have um, the Wikipedia for Yale and certain images of early Yale. And typically, this is what you think of when you think about Yale and its history. Though Wikipedia is not necessarily a source to be cited frequently, I think it does reflect how society sees a particular topic and all the contributions that go into it. So the ways that we think about Yale and the particular perceptions of Yale is frequently, elite white male. So a lot of the images are very similar of that. A lot of the stories are very similar, where you see the large classes of nothing but white males, or you see the baseball teams of white males, or they're in classrooms. You understand that Yale is a particular institution that has a lot of amazing alumni and people who have contributed to both the university, the city, as well as the nation and the world. But disproportionately, a lot of those things, at least prior to recently, has been thought of as being disproportionately white males. And I know that Yale doesn't control Wikipedia, nor does it control the Google images that come up related to the institution and its history, but it does control its own website. So these are a few items that I've highlighted from Yale's website where it discusses its own history. And frequently you'll see similar themes where it's highlighting a lot of the white males who are there disproportionately. Yale was predominantly a white male institution for a long time, but it also has the ability to reflect the diversity of everything that has been going on at the university throughout its existence. But I think this is a visual representation of the stories that are told, which can contribute to the perceptions that are had. There is a tile related to Edward Boucher, the first African American to get a graduate from Yale University, and that is a very important story to tell. I would, however, say there's so much more that could be told of the presence of African Americans within Yale's history that give that proper context to the stories that are there. There are a few stories of women in the tiles, so 1869 and 1923, 1969, but disproportionately those are viewed as white women. There are not African American women who are depicted there and their stories told as much as there could be. And I think that's, again, a way to potentially highlight what could be done and how we create the narrative. So from a perception perspective, you have to think about, as an alum or as a current student or even as a potential student, how do you see yourself in this institution, particularly as an African American? Is a potential journey to this college something that I'm interested in? Can I see myself there? Are there other people who came before me whose stories can be highlighted by the institution and others to make me feel like I belong in this space? And sometimes that perception is no. And I think that's something of an opportunity area as we go forward. So filling in the blanks. This again relates back to the importance of telling these stories and the work of finding and uncovering these early Yale students, because it is highly, highly important, especially when we are trying to attract the best talent to our institution. So the work of shedding light on truth and the stories of early Black Yalees showcase the breadth of the experiences that are out there and that are going untold. So these are a lot of the images of the individuals throughout Yale's history that could be told. Who are these individuals? What stories do they have? How have they impacted the institution of Yale, the city of New Haven, the state of Connecticut, and our nation, presumably the world as well? There's so much richness in these timelines that often go unmentioned or often go untold, that I find it highly, highly important to, again, share those things. The majority of the images here are, of course, based on my research. So it's disproportionately members of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated and the Zeta chapter, and also images that I personally scanned myself back in 2009, 2010. And only a few of them are from the internet, because I wanted to, showcase some of these amazing images, even though I may not have personally taken them. But overwhelmingly, these are images that I personally had a hand in cultivating. Not only was the work important to showcase the individuals and how they worked together, but also telling their stories. So not just simply that these are pictures or bios, but how did they interact? What things did they do around the city? How did they contribute to their community, work with other alumni across the nation, members of the various professions? So many stories, and the richness of the pictures allow them to come alive in narratives. I don't have time necessarily to read these items, and this will be true for the remaining part of the presentation. So in going back, we can pause or reflect or take more of a deeper dive into the stories themselves, but it just goes to show what is out there. And this is just a few of the stories that I will be highlighting. So part of it is looking at the process and understanding how it was that I came to uncover some of these stories of Yale alum and members of the Zeta chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Um, it basically started after my initiation and in preparation for the Zeta chapter's centennial celebration. So I was initiated into Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated in March of 2008, and then the Zeta chapter specifically. So taking a step back, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated was founded on December 4th, 1906 at Cornell University, and the Zeta chapter was founded a few years later in 1909 at Yale University. So after my initiation in 2008, I was elected the historian for the chapter and put in charge of our centennial history presentation. So I had about a year to prepare. And what I found was there's a lot of information missing from Zeta chapter's history, from the charter members, from basically 1913 until 1960, and then again through the 60s into the 1980s. Starting in the 1980s, of course, we've had a lot more of our history documented. Those individuals, of course, come back. They have conversations with current chapter members and alumni. There's a lot to go into current or more recent alum, but getting those early individuals is something that was very, very difficult, and we had a lot of gaps in our history then and still today. So I wasn't quite satisfied with the history that I was able to present at our meeting in 2009. So that set me to uncover more. What else can I find related to these early Yale students? What else? What are the other stories that are out there, both for the chapter as well as the institution of Yale, but also for the benefit of everyone? So my first steps were to, of course, go to Beinecke and to Sterling and see if they had anything related to early Black students at Yale University. But it was a very difficult task, of course. So, imagine saying, well, going to a person working there and say, I don't have any names or any resources or anything, but this is the topic that I'm looking for. And they expertly pointed me to the Yale banners and trying to understand that's probably, of course, where a lot of these individuals were. And that's where I should start. So that was my initial process. And understanding that the chapter was chartered in 1909, I figured, okay, if they were undergrads, they were either freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. So 1909 would be the seniors, and then 1910, 11, 12. So those are the banners that I would focus on first to see, are there any individuals who I can tell either phenotypically were African American or who listed activities related to the African American community in their bios? So potentially NAACP or Odd Fellows or Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity or other organizations that would lend them to say that these are African American students. So that's what how I began my search, and I had success. So the first item that I picked up was, of course, the Yale banner in 1909, and I flipped through the pages, and I eventually came to Jefferson Gatherford Ish Jr. These are, again, the pictures that I took, and they're a little grainy. So, again, this was in 2009, 2010. So the quality isn't amazing. But if you would like to read the bio, that's a better version to read. But I will be doing a little deeper dive on Mr. Ish here because, again, he was the first person that I came across, and his story is amazing. So his story before Yale, his story while at Yale, his story after Yale, his family story, his descendant story, and a potential and a connection to me, which is, again, something that I'll get into later. but he is a case study for all of the individuals that I was able to find. They all have similar stories, all have similar background and information that really, again, bring to life a lot of these individuals. So again, looking at his bio, if you're reading it, one, his father was born in 1854 in Tennessee. Some reports have him being born into slavery, but again, he became a principal of a school in Little Rock, Arkansas, which is amazing in and of itself. Ish's wife, Marietta Kidd, she herself was a graduate of Talladega College in Alabama, one of the first women to ever graduate from that school. So she has an amazing story, again, to tell, and we can see how Ish came from this wealth of knowledge and importance and background. Keeping, going down the line, you see he has a brother, G.W.S. Ish, 1905. So that's a second Black Yale student, or at this point alum, that I came across. In one paragraph, I've already found potentially two of these early individuals, which again blew me away and was very, very, very exciting. As we keep going, we can see that he graduated Talladega College and then enrolled at Yale, where he then roomed with P.M. Thorne in 1909. Given the time period, I would assume that this was another African American Yale student, which would be the third student that I would have, found, at least for myself, related to Alpha Phi Alpha, or we don't know that yet, but early students who could be members of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity and could be members of the Zeta chapter. So I was very, very, very excited to read this biography and to learn more about Mr. Ish. So part of the learnings and the Yale banners are also alumni notes. So whenever we have the 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, those reunions, people write back, and Ish was no different. He was able to write back about his story, what he did after his graduation from Yale University, his travels around the nation, the jobs that he had, and eventually how he was, in the 40th, which is listed here, a vice president of the Supreme Liberty Life Insurance Company in Chicago. So looking again into that history, that was an institution that provided insurance for African Americans during a time where a lot of majority white companies either refused to insure Black businesses or individuals, or did so at very high rates. So this company was wildly successful and one of the most successful Black businesses in the nation at that time. Another exciting thing about this biography, I'm not sure if you've seen it yet, but it lists Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. And so again, very, very excited, not necessarily saying that he had to have been a member of the Zeta chapter, but he could have certainly joined the organization within the 40 years that he gained, or before he wrote this article. But it's very, very exciting. More research needs to be done to see whether or not he was a member of the chapter, at least at this point when I was looking at this. Part of his story is also marriages and kids and grandkids. And one of the names that stuck out and that I'll highlight is Gene. I blurred other names just to make sure that, some of them could still be alive and not want their information out there. But it was very interesting to see that name. Skipping ahead a little bit, and this is the reason why, is once I found a lot of these early Black Yale students, I began posting them. I wrote Yale Daily News articles. I posted on the Yale Black Alumni Association's Facebook page and website. And on one of the posts, Gene actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, that was my grandfather who you were listing. Let's talk." So I actually got to converse with Gene in 2012 about her and her grandfather. I got to also hear other descendants of Ish talk about their uh, family and how this other individual said that she only had pictures of her, I guess, ancestor as he was older, and very few of them when he was younger. So this gave her an opportunity to see him in a new light. So that was very exciting. And one of the things that, again, Gene mentioned at the very end was Uncle Stanley. So going back to his biography, he did have a brother who went to Yale, GWS Ish, and I guess his name was Stanley. And so I researched to say, who is this individual? So again, amazing, amazing man, amazing, amazing family. He, of course, was a 1905 graduate of Yale University, went on to Harvard Law School, Harvard Medical School, was the chief surgeon at United Friends of America Hospital, and he too is a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Very, very exciting. So all of this came from one post, one uh, biography in the Yale's banners for 1909, and is again a representation of all of the stories that I've been able to find and how deep a lot of these stories go. Another one I found with the Yale class of 1911, I won't necessarily go into that much depth as I did with Mr. Ish Jr. On this one or the other ones, but wanting to highlight the second individual that I found is William Porter Norcom. This is the picture again that I took in 2009 of his biography and a couple other pictures of his reunion updates, where he again lists himself as a member of Alpha Alpha fraternity. This says medical fraternity, but of course Alpha Phi Alpha is not a medical fraternity, but you know, it was exciting to see that in his biography. A few other individuals that I was able to find, again, looking in those years, James Hathaway Robinson, who graduated in the 1912. This was his biography, and again, his update. Leon Pulaski O'Hara, again, an early Black Yale student. I don't know if, or at the time, I didn't know if these individuals were members of the Zeta chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, but it was very exciting to see them. And also Arthur Clement McNeil. These are, again, those stories and the types of stories I was able to find and taking pictures and documenting their existence. One, because they were early Black Yale students, but also their potential to be members of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity and the Zeta chapter. Sometimes my work was made a little easy. So this is Edward Gaylord Howell, and he graduated in Yale in 1920. And he made it very easy, like I said, because in his bio, he lists automatically that he was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha. And I was very excited because, of course, that meant the likelihood that he was a part of the Zeta chapter was really high. He was an alum of Shaw University, where he graduated in 1900. But at the same time, it is very possible that he was initiated into the Zeta chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. So again, there are many other individuals who I could talk about, but in the interest of time, just moving forward with the next set of questions. So how could I find whether or not these men who didn't necessarily list it are members of Alpha Phi Alpha and Zeta chapters specifically? So I leveraged the Sphinx, which is the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity's magazine. The Sphinx was started in 1914, and it is it's the second oldest African-American publication still in existence. And I was sure that these stories were a part of the magazine. These members had to write into the publication and tell who they were and tell their stories of being students and alum of Yale University. Unfortunately, a lot of the items were not digitized, so I had to actually travel to find copies of the Sphinx so I can research these items. So in Right after class ended in 2009, I took a trip to Cornell University, where I went into the library and I met with the general historian of Alpha Phi Alpha at the time and asked permission to say, of course, can I look through these articles? The Alpha Phi, the Alpha chapter of the organization was there. So he allowed me into their archives to be able to look specifically at mentions of potential Yale Zeta chapter and the men that I had found. Very, very exciting because that's where these stories came from. A lot of the images, the profiles of these men came from those articles. And it was one very exciting to confirm that yes, these men were a part, some of them were a part of the Zeta chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, but also that there were other interconnectedness between them. So having one-off pictures is one thing, but seeing people together is another. So showing how they interacted with the community, being unified in all of these pictures and coming together for specific causes was very, very exciting for me. Part of the stories that were showcased were how excellence was pervasive amongst these individuals. There are stories from the early 1900s of uh, contests at Yale Law School or events within New Haven that had individuals to be a part of them and the cases that they would try, or their dentistry practices in New Haven that were amazing and wildly successful. There were competitions between Brown University's debate team and Yale's debate team of the African Americans at Zeta chapter, who would both compete for their own benefit, but also for that of the community. These are just some of the stories to highlight related to how these men interacted with scholarship throughout their time within the chapter. Another way I uncovered excellence was their stories around New Haven, where they weren't just scholars. They were definitely scholars, but they also interacted with the community. Sometimes things would happen where the church, this particular example, a church asked for a mock trial to be done for the public viewing and public benefit. That was granted, and that was done by the members of the Zeta chapter. There were individuals who had events where Dr. William Pickens, of course, a Yale alum, came back and was a member. But by far, I think one of the most exciting things that I found was this third one, the February 1924, where it talked about how Brother Harry G. Tolliver, who is a Yale Law School alum, he graduated in 1908, was elected alderman of New Haven. This was very exciting because this was, in the words of the people who wrote it, the first office of any consequence to which a Negro had been elected in the history of Connecticut politics. Wild, very, very exciting. And I wasn't sure if that information was known at the time, so it made learning that information very, very exciting for me. The picture of the Zeta chapter there, those men, was again another way that the chapter was involved within the community. This depicts the go to high school, go to college event in 1925, where we see both William Porter Norcom, who I'd mentioned, Harry Tolliver, Richard Fleming, and also Charles A. Tribbett, and also County Cullen. These are individuals who are, I don't know, just very, very exciting to me to be seen in one photo and showing how important it was for them to come together to be a part of this go to high school, go to college program, which is one of the very strong pillars of Alpha Phi Alpha for fraternity. And it, of course, encourages individuals, particularly African American individuals, to make sure they go to college and high school and finish high school, and go to college and finish college. Another exciting portion of this is fellowship. So not only were they good academically and involved in the community, but it also talked about how they interacted outside of each of those things and what they did for fun. This particular note depicts the Yale Harvard game in 1916, where a lot of the Zeta chapter brothers hosted an event for visiting individuals so they can that the day before the game. A couple notable individuals is, of course, W.B. Du Bois, who was a Harvard alum, but also Fritz Pollard, which is depicted here. The exciting thing about this was showing how interconnected these individuals were, not only to themselves and the other Black individuals at Yale at the time, but how it was a way to be social across schools. So Fritz Pollard was at Brown University, and he was an all-star football player there. He was an All-American, the first African American to play in the Rose Bowl, set world records for the hurdles at Brown, qualified for the Olympics, first African American in the NFL, first African American quarterback, all-star in the NFL, and one of the first African American head coach in the NFL. So this is very exciting to me because it again paints the picture of how these individuals were living, not just pictures of themselves, but putting some context to their lives, their stories, how they felt, what they did. And again, these are just a few of all of the stories that are out there. Circling back, why these stories matter. I think that's where we again have that learning history as resistance. Whenever we encounter stories where people paint Yale or any institution in a particular light to say disproportionately these are only stories that are worth telling are those of the white males that are there. We are now able to resist that. We are able to say, actually, there's someone in this picture that I know. I know that's Jefferson Rutherford Ish Jr. I know he had a brother who graduated in 1905, who went to Harvard Medical School. I know the family history. I know his descendants. I know his granddaughter. We can actually talk to her and have her tell more stories about their lives. These stories empower both the present people to look into the past to be able to resist whenever stories are put out of the proper proportions. When we see Yale's history listed in this way, where only Edward Boucher is one that is highlighted as a landmark in Yale's history, we can encourage them. We can resist. We can say, hey, Yale, how about we include the stories and the perspectives and the successes of the African American students who are there, so that it corrects that perception for current, future, and past students. How about we include the names and the pictures and the individuals again throughout Yale's history of those African American members of the institution that contributed so much to it. Let's tell their stories. Let's add the proper context. I will also say that without, my focus was on Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity and the Zeta chapter. So that's what is depicted here disproportionately. But there could be an entire presentation that is very similar and that highlights the roles that Black women have played at Yale at the same time. It was not my focus as I looked at the early members of the Zeta chapter. So disproportionately, my research did not include the stories of these women, but we should be also highly, highly interested in their stories and what their experiences were like, and did they interact with each other, and what did they do while at Yale, before Yale, and how they contributed to everything related to this institution. The one picture that I did have is in the bottom right corner of the ladies of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated's Xi Omicron chapter. In my own research, I did come across those stories as well, and wanted to make sure to include not only the early Black women at Yale, but also how that is continued through today. So again, in closing, our learning this history can be a form of resistance. We have the ability to correct these perceptions and not allow certain things to be not included. How we see ourselves is dependent on how we are taught history, but also how others see themselves and how we explain it to others. It is very important to make sure that those who do not know, who may not be as well versed in some of this history, that they are told, all that is there, because that affects us, our self-esteem. It may not allow us to apply to certain institutions or do certain jobs or go certain places, or it may impact how we see society and our place in it. But the more that we learn, the more that we get that proper context, I think the more we can have that confidence both in ourselves and in the future.